We start here in Japan with the latest on the coronavirus. Companies and universities are offering to help in the government's efforts to roll out vaccinations. Inoculations for healthcare workers and the elderly are underway, but the country's vaccination rate remains around 10%. The government will allow companies to inoculate their employees starting on June 21st. More than 400 firms have applied. East Japan Railway Company plans to give 2 shots to 22,000 train operators by the end of the year. Kansai Electric Power Company will have 5 doctors who usually work at the head office and nuclear power plants administer vaccines to its employees.
We hope we can help speed up vaccinations and contribute to the reduction of infections by inoculating as many people as possible.
At least 8 colleges across Japan intend to set up inoculation sites. Keio University in central Tokyo aims to give shots to about 50,000 staff members and students. The minister in charge of the coronavirus response has released the findings from 993 cases of cluster infections reported in Japan last month. The largest number occurred at facilities for the elderly, followed by the workplace and schools.
Some variants are thought to be more infectious. Thorough antivirus measures need to be taken, such as setting up dividers, frequent ventilation, and disinfecting. We need to continue to wear masks and maintain social distancing.
Health authorities across Japan confirmed more than 1,800 new coronavirus infections on Tuesday. Nearly 370 of them were in Tokyo, which is under a state of emergency until June 20th. Along with 9 other prefectures. Turning now to the upcoming Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, when 78,000 people other than athletes are expected to visit Japan. On Tuesday, the head of the organizing committee announced new anti-coronavirus measures targeting journalists from abroad.
We will tightly restrict the behavior of media from overseas by using GPS tracking so that they do not go to areas other than ones they've registered in advance. They aren't allowed to use public transportation for 14 days after arriving in Japan. They can only work in designated business areas during that period. Their accommodation will be limited to facilities that the organizing committee can monitor.
Hashimoto also says they'll be tested daily for the first 3 days after their arrival and then frequently after that. She said they'll deal with violators strictly through measures such as revoking accreditation. Meanwhile, preparations for the Games have started on the ground. Near the National Stadium, traffic restrictions began on Tuesday. The secured area will be expanded and remain in place until the end of September, well after the Paralympics finish. But the pandemic has been affecting plans surrounding the Games, like training camps, many of which are being called off. A town in western Japan has decided not to host athletes from Trinidad and Tobago. It had planned to welcome that team as well as athletes from Taiwan. But it made the decision to cancel both after the Taiwanese team pulled out, citing the current COVID situation. Across Japan, training camps have been called off in about 100 municipalities. Meanwhile, Japan's minister for the Games told reporters today that the Olympics will not be delayed again.
My feeling now is that, in the end, it will be pretty difficult to postpone the event. There are specific discussions taking place now about pre-Games training camps and other events. And if they also had to consider securing venues and accommodation at a future date, it would get very difficult.
The Olympics opening ceremony is scheduled for July 23rd. The Paralympics will kick off a month later. Myanmar's anti-military protests are spreading to the field of sports. At a soccer match last month, a Myanmar player raised the 3-finger salute associated with the protests. Some had criticized the players, saying that playing in an international match makes them look as though they're accepting the military's position. His gesture made a big splash on social media, NHK asked him about his thoughts.
I raised three fingers because I wanted people to know that players are also against the military coup. I made up my mind to make some sort of protest before leaving for Japan.
Pie Lian Aung showed the three-finger salute during the national anthem at the Japan-Myanmar qualifying match for the 2022 World Cup. Written on his fingers was the message, "We need justice." He said that although he knew he was risking punishment, he wanted to show his solidarity with his fellow citizens back in Myanmar.
I'll take responsibility for what I did, that's fine. But what's important is not to let those connected with me become
The people who have lost their lives in the protests.
COVID case numbers continue to drop in India, with fewer than 100,000 new daily infections reported for the first time in 2 months. New Delhi eased some coronavirus restrictions on Monday. NHK World's Neha Sharma reports on the situation in New Delhi.
After a devastating second wave of COVID-19, Delhi is moving slowly toward normal life. Many people can be seen at local markets where shops are taking turns and opening on alternate days to avoid crowding. Shopkeepers seem to be glad to be able to open after lockdown. Road traffic also increased. Workers have started going to their offices, though the government encourages working from home. The decision to ease restrictions was taken after the COVID situation began to improve, the city's economy was struggling and livelihoods were being affected. The Delhi government said more restrictions will be announced if case numbers again begin to rise, adding that it is preparing for a third wave. The Indian government is trying to ramp up its vaccination program, but it's a constant struggle, partly due to the failed initial rollout that saw demand outstrip supply. Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that the central government would take over the vaccination program and that all those 18 and older will receive free vaccines starting on June 21st. To increase availability, the process of procuring vaccines from abroad is being expedited. Experts are also concerned about children, and 2 new vaccines are being tested. India has administered more than 230 million doses of COVID vaccines so far, but still less than 4% of its 1.3 billion people have been fully vaccinated.
The latest now on Peru's presidential election. Leftist Pedro Castillo has edged ahead of his conservative rival Keiko Fujimori, but only by the smallest of margins. About 96% of the ballots have been counted since Sunday's runoff vote. Early on Tuesday, authorities put the difference between the two candidates at less than a single percentage point. Castillo is an elementary school teacher. He has gained support among the poor and in rural areas by calling for state control of the energy sector and the drafting of a new constitution. Fujimori is the eldest daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori. Her pledge to protect democracy and the free economy has gone down well among business people and the wealthy. Peru has been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. The country's per capita death rate is the world's highest. Whoever wins the election must rebuild both the battered economy and medical system. A Muslim group in southwestern Japan is asking the government to create burial sites for their growing population. It wants at least one public site established in each prefecture, or to designate part of existing public cemeteries for Muslim burials. The group, based in Beppu City, says there's a shortage of burial sites for Muslims. The religion doesn't allow cremation, which is a widespread practice in Japan. The group purchased a plot of land in a neighboring town 3 years ago and tried to get permission to build a cemetery. But the plan stalled, partly due to opposition from residents. The group plans to visit the Welfare Ministry next week to submit a petition for the Kyushu and Okinawa regions. The group's leader, Khan Muhammad Tahir Abbas, who has acquired Japanese nationality, noted the shortage of cemeteries that meet their needs, is a serious problem. One survey estimates there are about 200,000 Muslims living in Japan. It's time now for a check on world weather. People in parts of the U.S. and Canada have been dealing with stifling hot weather for days. Our meteorologist Sakamori has the details.
Hello there. Parts of the eastern U.S. and eastern Canada saw unusually high temperatures once again on Monday. The highs were in the mid-30s in many places, including Boston as well as New Brunswick, Canada. Temperatures have been nearly 10 degrees higher than normal for this time of year. Hot conditions will likely continue. Meanwhile, on Monday, a huge tornado was sighted in parts of Colorado in Weld County. A huge storm caused some damage. No human fatalities have been reported, but some animals have been killed. There's a smaller chance of tornadoes in the northern Rockies on Tuesday, along with large hail as well as damaging winds, and thunderstorms are expected too, and heavy rain could lead to flooding in the Rockies and also the plains as well. Temperatures are going to be in the 30s in Denver, 31 for the high on Wednesday, looking pretty hot in Chicago and Houston, and pretty hot along the eastern seaboard too, in the 30s for you in the U.S. capital as well as New York City. Heavy rain hit the Okinawa region. 206 millimeters of rain fell in just 24 hours. That's the record for the month of June. And we saw quite high temperatures for many places of the main islands of Japan. Tokyo had 31.4 degrees on Tuesday. That's the hottest temperature of the year so far. The hottest place in Japan was Tendi, where the mercury hit 34 degrees. Tokyo is continuously seeing high temperatures and also sunny weather, at least into Saturday, and cloudy conditions or rainy conditions are expected from the weekend, so the rainy season will likely start soon. Meanwhile, a storm system is pummeling parts of southeastern Australia with heavy mountain snow, gusty winds, and heavy rainfall in the low-lying areas. Because this slow will be stationary, we will continue to see stormy conditions for the next several days, and temperatures will be unusually low, -1 for the high or for the low in Canberra on your Thursday. That's it for me. Stay safe.
In Pakistan, officials in Sindh province are removing wreckage from a train accident that killed at least 65 people and injured more than 100 others. In the United States, Pfizer begins testing its COVID-19 vaccine on 5 to 11-year-old children. An outage at a cloud computing company left websites for the British government and for companies like Amazon, Target, The New York Times, and CNN unavailable briefly on Tuesday. And in Mongolia, voting opens Wednesday in the first presidential election since constitutional amendments limited the term and powers of the presidency.
A UN court has rejected Ratko Mladic's appeal against his conviction for crimes against humanity and genocide for his role in the Srebrenica massacre. A UN war crimes tribunal jailed him for life in 2017, and that's been upheld. Police in 16 countries have arrested hundreds of people after intercepting millions of messages by suspected members of organised crime groups. Those detained had been tricked into using a messaging app run by the FBI. The US Vice President, Kamala Harris, and the Mexican President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, have discussed ways of improving economic prospects and security in order to curb illegal migration. And President Macron of France has denied that the political climate was deteriorating after being slapped in the face by a man as he shook his hand.